Alright, what's going on everybody? It's your boy Akeem and welcome to today's vlog. The college football season is getting closer and closer away and it's time for me to start giving you my previews for the 2013 college football season. Now for this video, I'm going to talk about the roughest, toughest, most dangerous conference in college football, and that is the SEC conference. Now we have amazing teams in this conference and I think this is pretty much a pre-NFL league conference because they have so many powerhouses coming into this season in college football. Now I have a couple of headline news to start off with, starting with Texas A&M. They had an amazing year last season, going 11-2 under new head coach Kevin Sumlin, and they produced a Heisman winner and quarterback Johnny Manziel, who even led the league in the SEC in rushing for 1,410 yards. He had an amazing year and he's looking to redo what he did last season and get at least double-digit wins, but it's going to be a tough year and all eyes is going to be on Manziel and the Texas A&M Aggies. But they suffered a lot of losses on both sides of the field. Now offensively, Manziel's going to have to play without his mentor Cliff Kingsbury. He is now with the Texas Tech Raiders, so they have a new offensive coordinator. Also, Texas A&M is going to have to play without the two leading receivers, Uzuma Owachitu as well as Brian Swope. They're no longer with the team. Now they do have Ben Malima, the running back, behind him, but I still think all eyes is going to be on Johnny Manziel and that passing attack, and losing those top two targets, that's going to be very hard. And last but not least, he's going to miss some great protection from Luke Joku, the number 2 overall selection to the Jacksonville Jaguars in this past NFL draft. But they have a good player that I think could be a good replacement of him at the left tackle position, and that is Jake Matthews. Now also on the defensive side, they're going to have to play without linemen Sean Porter, who's a great pass rusher, as well as Jonathan Stewart. So Stephen Jenkins, the third leading tackle of last season, is going to have to step it up this year. So we're all going to really focus a lot on the SEC conference with Texas A&M, and hopefully they can still respring what they did last season. Another headline news, the Ole Miss Rebels, they had an amazing recruiting this past spring with all the great high school players coming into college football. They picked up the number 1 defensive end and Robert Kindici, the number 1 wide receiver, and Laquan Treadwell, and the number 1 interior lineman, and Laramie Tenso. And they also picked a good number 2 overall safety, and Antonio Connor. Now this secondary last season for the Rebels was some straight garbage and they need a lot of help in that secondary, so hopefully Antonio Connor can step it up and to produce well and improve that secondary. Third leading news to talk about, they have a couple of head coaching changes in the SEC conference as well as throughout of college football, but 2 head coaches in particular that I'm going to be looking at, and that is Brett Bielema out of Arkansas Razorbacks as well as Gus Malzahn out of the Auburn Tigers. Starting with Bielema, he actually led the Wisconsin Badgers to 3 Big Ten titles, 2 in a row with Russell Wilson and Monty Ball last season. Last season, they did a tremendous job in that Big Ten championship, but he's transitioning to the SEC conference, and we all know that there's a huge difference between the Big Ten conference and the SEC, especially from what we saw on the Outback Bowl between Michigan and South Carolina, where your boy Jadeveon Clowney was just smashing dudes and laying the smackdown throughout the entire game. So he's going to get a rude awakening for this Arkansas Razorback team, who is rebuilding for the next upcoming seasons. Now, Gus Malzahn, he actually was the offensive coordinator for the Auburn Tigers back in 2010 when they won the national championship. But now he is the head coach and he's looking to turn that team around. And last but not least, we're all really going to be looking at as well, I talked about Texas A&M, but everybody's going to be looking on who can beat the Alabama Crimson Tide. They won 2 straight national championships and they're looking to win 3 in a row, and that's going to be a big concern for every team in the SEC conference. Now I have a lot of impact players for you guys coming into this season, starting at the quarterback position. I already mentioned Johnny Manziel, last year's Heisman Trophy winner, but there's 2 other quarterbacks that I like who was actually rated number 1 and number 2 in passer rating last season. Number 1 was A.J. McCarron. He had 30 touchdowns and just 3 interceptions, and the number 2 quarterback was Aaron Murray from Georgia, 3,800 yards passing, would go along with 36 touchdowns and 10 interceptions. Those are key players in this SEC conference at quarterback. At running back, I have two players in particular that I love, and that is starting with Todd Gurley from the University of Georgia. This Bulldog running back had a great year as a bruiser, over 1,300 yards rushing and 17 touchdowns. And he's one half of a tandem with Keith Marshall, where both these players rushed for over 2,100 yards. And also the other running back is T.J. Yeldon out of the University of Alabama Crimson Tide. He had over 1,000 yards last season, 6.3 yards per carry, despite splitting carries with leading rusher Eddie Lacy, who is now in the National Football League. At the receiver position, I have two players to look at. Jordan Matthews from Vanderbilt. He was second in the SEC with 1,323 yards receiving. And Amari Cooper out of Alabama. He had exactly 1,000 yards last season, and he has All-American implications written on him already. I think he's going to be the big target for A.J. McCarron this upcoming year. Defensively, I have five players in particular that I'm going to be looking at. C.J. Mosley and Clinton Dix from Alabama. The secondary player as well as the linebacker, especially with C.J. Mosley at linebacker, he would definitely be a finalist for the Buckus Award, and I think that the Jim Thorpe Award candidate will be a good candidate in Clinton Dix, especially coming off a great national championship game he had against the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. He had a monstrous game, and he was one of the reasons why Alabama crushed Notre Dame. Three other players, Tennessee, they have a terrible defense, but they have a good safety in Byron Moore, who had 84 tackles and 5 interceptions last season. Hopefully he can help improve that defense and be a good vocal leader for them. And also Jadeveon Clowney, he's a good player out of South Carolina. I mentioned him earlier, 13 sacks last season, and in my opinion, he will be one of the top 3 selections for the 2014 NFL Draft. Now, I have a couple of breakthrough players for you guys entering this season, players that I think they're going to have a good monster year, a breakout season. I'm starting at the quarterback position. I have 2 players. Bo Wallace out of Ole Miss, he had 22 touchdowns and 17 interceptions last season, but he has so many great news for him coming into this season. He has 4 returning offensive linemen, and I mentioned earlier that Laramie Tenzel, the #1 interior lineman coming out of high school, is now a Rebel, and he also has the #1 receiver in Laquan Treadwell. Also, he has a good receiver in Dante Moncrief, who had just under 1,000 yards receiving last season, and the returning running back Jessica Scott behind him. I think this Ole Miss team can be a good sleeper in the SEC Conference. The second quarterback is Zach Mettenberger out of LSU. Now, coming out of Georgia, transferring from Georgia, LSU had a lot of high hopes for him. Even myself, he has the look, he has the tools, he has the arm, but he has not lived up to the hype and produced for LSU. Now, they have a new offensive coordinator from the NFL, Cam Cameron. He's a good tutor for quarterbacks, and I think he would give them the wisdom to improve this year, and might even give LSU a run for their money and try to make it to the SEC championship this year. At running backs, I got 2 players in particular for South Carolina, and one's from South Carolina, and Mike Davis. I think he's a decent running back, 5.3 yards per carry. He's going to be carrying the load as a sophomore. They no longer have Marcus Lattimore, so Mike Davis is going to have to step it up. I think he's going to be due for a good year. A player who did have a breakthrough season a couple years ago, and that is Henry Posey from the Mizzou Tigers. He's a speedster, but he was out last season due to a knee injury, but he is back this year. Kendall Lawrence actually replaced him last year and rushed for over 1,100 yards, so I think that Henry Posey will have another good year. Also, another running back that I'm going to be looking at, and that is Trey Mason out of Auburn. He had a good breakthrough season last season where he rushed for over 1,000 yards, 5.9 yards per carry, and he's going to be carrying the bulk of the load for the Tigers, and Gus Malzahn will definitely use him a lot in running the football. At the receiver position, I think one player is going to make a good comeback, and that is Kenny Bell out of the Crimson Tide. I think coming towards the second half of the season, he improved, but he had an injury, but I think he's going to have a good comeback this year. And I mentioned earlier, Jake Matthews, the offensive tackle, he's going to be playing left tackle for Texas A&M. I think he has All-American implications written all over him. I think he's due for a great All-American year. And on the defensive side, 3 players in particular, Jordan Jenkins out of UGA. I think he's he could be a good, decent rusher. Had 5 sacks last season, and they're looking, Mark Richt, the head coach for Georgia, is looking to have Jenkins to replace Jarvis Jones, the All-American linebacker. At Auburn, D Ford, who had 6.5 sacks last season at defensive end. He actually led the team. I think he's going to have a decent season. Hopefully, he could bust out double-digit sacks. And last but not least, Craig Loxton out of LSU. I think he's a good safety. He will definitely make all SEC, possibly an All-American. And the LSU Tigers defense, they lost a lot of key players, including Eric Reed, who's now with my San Francisco 49ers. So Craig Loxton's going to have to lead that secondary and help them out a lot and make big plays. So those are my breakthrough players coming into this season. Now I have 5 incoming freshmen that I'm going to keep my eye on, starting with Alex Collins out of Arkansas. Brett Bielema has a lot of high hopes for this 5-star athlete out of Florida. He actually chose Arkansas over Miami, which was big news for Brett Bielema, who's going to try to help use him to rebuild this team. Now Monte Ball was that leading rusher at Wisconsin, and Alex Collins is going to be that go-to guy for Brett Bielema and the Arkansas Razorbacks. Now at Auburn, I mentioned Ford, but there's 2 incoming freshmen that I'm going to be looking at. That's Elijah Daniels and Carl Lawson. Now even though D Ford led the team in sacks last season, the real true heart and soul of that defense was Corey Lemonier. He's no longer with the team, so I'm looking at both of these 2 freshmen to replace him and have a good year. Third player I need to talk about is Calvin Taylor out of the University of Florida, the Florida Gators. Now his father, Fred Taylor, had a great career, and I think that Calvin Taylor will help fulfill that legacy and help prove the hype that he's a great running back. He broke Florida high school rushing records this past season, and I think he's going to have a great career. I think coming towards the end of the season, he will be that starting running back for the Gators. Fourth player I need to talk about, Marquez North out of Tennessee. Tennessee lost a lot of wide receivers like Zach Rogers, Justin Hunter, and Cordario Patterson, the number 1 and number 2 leading targets from last season. And I think that this kid North, I think he has a good speed, good route running ability, and I think he has the chance to start right away for this team. He's going to be competing with Vincent Dallas, Jacob Carter, and Pig Howard for the receiver position, but I think he will be that starting target and possibly become the SEC Offensive Rookie of the Year because of this situation. And last but not least, I mentioned earlier in this video, Robert Nkemdiche out of Ole Miss. Now this guy has the size and frame at 6'5", 270 pounds to play at this high level SEC conference, and he's also working along with his older brother Denzel Nkemdiche, and I think under his tutelage, I think he's going to have a dominant freshman season, just like Jadeveon Clowney did when he did as a freshman a couple of years back. I think that Robert Nkemdiche only needs to work on is his hand work. He needs to, like a lot of incoming freshmen, most of the incoming defensive linemen, they're going to have to learn how to use their hands to shed off the blockers. But he has the tenacity, the speed, and the strength to produce for the Ole Miss Rebels right away. Now I'm ending this video. I have a couple of key games that I need to talk about heading into this season. Starting on September 7th, this is going to be a SEC East title implications on the line with South Carolina at Georgia. Georgia lost last season, but they're home this year, and they're looking to avenge that loss. I firmly believe that the winner of this game will make it to the SEC Championship. On Saturday, September 14th, Alabama is going to be traveling to Texas A&M early to face the Aggies. They're looking to avenge their 29-24 loss last season, and on that same day, LSU is going to be traveling to Georgia. Now, this is Georgia's except for South Carolina, I think this is Georgia's only other big test before heading to the SEC Championship. On November 2nd, Georgia's going to be traveling at a neutral site to face the Florida Gators. That's going to be a good rivalry matchup. This can also be a good SEC East title implicator, only if Florida can have the ability to throw the football well this season. Last year, there were 118, and Jeff Driscoll is going to have to step it up in that passing game. If Florida does better throwing the football, they will compete for the SEC East title. But I'll let you know at the end of this video. On November 9th, LSU is going to be traveling to Alabama to face the Crimson Tide. Now, my personal opinion, I think the Tigers pretty much gave that game away last season, and had they beaten Alabama, they would have made it to the SEC Championship. On November 23rd, Texas A&M is going to be playing LSU. LSU beat the Aggies last season, and the Aggies is looking to avenge that loss. Now, I have 3 non-conference games that I think that everybody should look out for. On August 31st, I have 2 games in particular. Georgia's going to be traveling at Clemson to face the Tigers. That's going to be a good game to watch because Georgia has a good, favorable schedule to going undefeated before heading to the SEC championship, and this is going to be that test that everybody's going to be looking at how well this Georgia team will be. Now, they lost a lot of players defensively. I already mentioned Jordan Jenkins, but that's pretty much all they had, and they're going to have to rebuild that defense. And they're going to be playing against a good offense led by an ACC Player of the Year candidate, Taj Boyd. He's a great quarterback. This is going to be that first test for the Georgia Bulldogs. That same day, LSU is going to be traveling to a neutral site to face TCU, an improved Horned Frog team. I think this team can give the LSU Tigers a run for their money. I think this is a good game that everybody should watch. On September 14th, this is going to be the first test for the Ole Miss Rebels. They're looking to avenge last season's loss to my Texas Longhorns, a good team, a quality team, and we're going to see how well these freshmen is going to perform against high-quality players from my Texas Longhorns. Now, I'm going to end this video with my predictions for the winners overall in the SEC championship. But before I talk about the SEC championship, I'm going to talk to you about the awards. The Offensive Player of the Year award, I'm going to predict A.J. McCarron out of Alabama over Johnny Manziel from Texas A&M. Because of all the off-the-field issues Johnny Manziel has been dealing with, I think a lot of voters are actually going to be scared away in voting Johnny Manziel. So I think that A.J. McCarron will be that guy that they're going to look to vote for SEC Player of the Year. And also, because of the situation at Alabama, he has a great defense. They're looking to stay undefeated, and if he just manages the offense well, just like Joe Flacco did for the Baltimore Ravens, he should be that Player of the Year. Defensive Player of the Year, this is an obvious pick for pretty much everybody. Jadeveon Clowney from South Carolina. Like I said, he's a tenacious player, 13 sacks last season, and I think he will top that this year. Defensive Rookie of the Year, I'm going to go with Ole Miss, Robert Nkemdiche. I think he's going to have a monstrous season, and I think he's going to do well in his first year as a freshman. Offensive Rookie of the Year, I'm going to go with Arkansas's Alex Collins. This guy is a 5-star athlete, and I think even though he's going to be splitting carries early in the season with Jonathan Williams, I still think the job is in Collins' hands, and I think he will carry the bulk of the load throughout the season. So I have to go with Collins over even Marquez North from Tennessee. So I have to go with Collins on that. Now, my SEC Coach of the Year, I'm going to go with Nick Saban from Alabama. I think they have a chance of going undefeated this season. Now, my SEC champion, I'm going to go with Alabama over Georgia again. I think Georgia will represent the East and Alabama will represent the West, and I think that Alabama will beat Georgia in that SEC title matchup. So that wraps things up with my preview video for SEC. My next video will be posted tomorrow where I will talk about the Big Ten Conference. Thank you for watching this vlog. I'm your man, Akeem McCall. Be easy.